Hi folks, it's Andy. Hope you're having a fantastic day. New video for you today. I thought it'd be interesting for us to have a look at this standard guideline for Dan and Q examination. I've talked about doing this video for a while, and I thought now would be a great time to do it. Basically, we're going to go through the whole document. It's essentially the document that the International Kendo Federation put out as guidelines for how to pass each grade, okay? And it's their sort of official guidelines. So in theory, if you're able to follow these guidelines, then you should have no issue passing any of your grades. Now, as you can probably already see, it gives you guidance from EQ all the way up to 10th Dan, okay, up to 10th Dan. Now, we all know that they don't really award 9th and 10th Dan anymore, but we'll go through it anyway. Basically, it takes you right from the start all the way to the end, all right? So we're going to look at every single aspect of the sort of grading journey via the guidance of the International Kendo Federation, all right? So I think this video is going to be useful for anybody that is either looking to take a Dan grade in the future, or if somebody is, I think it's useful on that point of view, if you've got students that are looking to take grades, so it's a good guide for Kendo teachers as well. I think it's a really great resource for grading panelists as well. If you're going to sit on a grading panel, it outlines essentially what a grading panelist should be looking for at each level of the grading. So I think it's a super great resource. I really wanted to go through it, so we'll jump into it. Before we do though, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. You know the YouTube magic. Leave a comment down below using the word Kendo so that we can grow the Kendo population. What a great Kendo channel. It's the best Kendo channel I've ever seen. Do that and the YouTube Ninja Robots will go out and help us grow the Kendo population. We've been doing it all year and it's been a massive, massive success. More importantly than that though, if you do like this video or the videos that I put out, whether it's this kind of video, the Q&A type videos that I do via Kendo Rant, whether it is the instructional content, the feedback content, the analytical content, we've got all sorts of stuff, and it's all completely free of charge. No subscriptions, no paying for, what do you call it, subtitles, there's no membership areas, nothing like that. All you have to do is shop at KendoStar.com. It's a real win-win because KendoStar is the best Kendo equipment website ever in the future and history of the human race. Now, of course, I would say that because I own the place, but it's true. Everyone agrees with me. You're going to shop with us anyway, so don't buy twice, buy right first time round, all right? We're an established business, full team of staff ready to serve you, okay? You get the best equipment, you get the best service, all right? KendoStar is the best place to be shopping. So, without further ado, let's have a look at this document, shall we? So, this says standard guideline for Dan/Q examination from the International Kendo Federation. So this is downloadable from the International Kendo Federation's website. If I remember, I'll link to the document itself in the comments as well. It's a PDF. It says right at the top, these regulations pertain to Kendo, Iaido, Jodo promotional exams and the awarding of Dan grades administered by the International Kendo Federation. So, a couple of key points there straight off. First of all, I'm only going to be talking about Kendo, all right? I'm not going to be talking about Iaido and Jodo. Second, this is the guidelines for the grades given by the International Kendo Federation, and it's essentially the same for the All Japan Kendo Federation. That means it might be different in your country, so don't be surprised if some of this stuff's a little bit different to what's happening in the country that you live in. Okay, so with that said, the next part says general provision, Article 2, the Dan Q stipulated in this standard guideline shall be from 1st Q, IQ, to 10th Dan, Judan, okay? Shall be granted by the President of organisation according to the overall ability of the applicant and shall be mutually recognised as being equivalent among organisations. So that means that if you get one of these grades in one organisation, it should be recognised as equal or equivalent in the other organisations, all right? So that's essentially what they're saying. An applicant's qualification. An applicant shall be registered member of the organisation and shall have the following periods of practice. So this is the grading calendar that we often talk about, all right? Now, again, let me be really clear here. This is the FIK's guidelines, all right? So this might not hold true in your country. So what I definitely don't want anybody here doing is kicking off with your federation because they don't necessarily follow these guidelines to the T. Each federation or organisation has the authority to set their own criteria. This is just a guideline for them to base it off if they should wish to, all right? So don't, you know, just let's be clear on that, all right? This isn't, I'm not making this video to cause ripples or ruffle anyone's feathers, all right? So let's be upfront with that. So IQ has no requirements for practice periods or a lowest age, but Shodan, you should be IQ and you should be over the age of 13, all right? Now this is generally the standard in Japan because it is like generally the age kids start to go to junior high school, okay? Nidan, 1 or more years after first dan. Third dan or sandan should be 2 or more years after Nidan or second dan. Fourth dan or yondan, 4 or more years after 3 or more years after third dan, skipping one there. Godan, fifth dan, should be 4 years or more after fourth dan. Sixth dan or rokudan should be 5 years after fifth dan. Seventh dan or shichidan, most people call it nanadan, but in fact most people call it nanadan, but shichidan is also the fair, it's the same kanji, just different reading of it, right? It's a bit like yondan. Some people call yondan in Japan. I've heard lots of people call it yodan as well, not just yondan. That's 6 years after sixth dan. Eighth dan, which is hachidan, of course, you have to have 10 years of practice after seventh dan. So that's the sort of slightly different one, isn't it? Where you have to, you know, there's a difference in that, okay? And then ninth dan is after grade. Oh, sorry, and I forgot to mention for the eighth dan you have to be over the age of 46. Okay. For ninth dan, Q dan, it's after getting eighth dan and be over the age of 65. And 10th dan, Ju dan, after becoming ninth dan. Now we know that they don't award above ninth dan anymore. Okay, that I think they stopped that in the year 2000. All right, but that the point is this is here just to give. I mean, there's nothing, I guess, theoretically to stop a federation deciding to grant its own grades of this level. I don't think anywhere would, but there you go. Those who desire to apply for 6th, 7th or 8th dan examination, who are 60 years or older, have practiced for certain years below shall be allowed to apply. So what they're saying here is if you're over the age of 60, well, 60 or over, then the practice periods can be adjusted as follows. So for 6th dan, you can take 6th dan 2 years after you take 5th dan instead of the usual 5 years. And 7th dan, you can take 3 years after taking 6th dan instead of the usual 6 years. And then hachidan, you can try 5 years after taking 7th dan instead of the usual 10 years. All right. So that's that. That's obviously a provision to allow people later in life to still have a chance at testing these grades, perhaps if they started Kendo a bit later in life. Okay. Again, this is the FIK's guidelines. It doesn't mean that they do this everywhere. All right. It doesn't mean that they do this everywhere. Examiners' qualifications. So the required number of examiners and eligibility criteria. So this tells you about how the grading panel should be made up. All right. Now I know I'm talking about a lot of the process and the procedure here, but what we're going to get into after is it goes into the requirements, and I think that's what's going to be really useful for a lot of you, is what you have to do for each part. But I think it's really good to understand the system as well. So essentially, examiners' qualifications, required number of the examiners and eligibility criteria as follows. So for grading panel to be eligible to grade for first dan, the examiners should be 4th dan and above, and there should be 5 of them, and you should get the consent of 3 examiners. All right, so you need five panelists that are 4th dan and above, all right, to grade for Shodan. For second dan, it's the same, but the panelists should be 5th dan and above, okay? Third Dan should be the same as for second Dan, okay? That's five people who are fifth Dan and above with the consent of 3 examiners. So you need 3 of those 5 to pass you, okay? For fourth Dan, there should be 6 panelists who are sixth Dan and above, and you should have the consent, or you should have a pass from 4 of the examination panel. And then for fifth Dan, sixth Dan and seventh Dan, the examiner qualification is all 7th Dan and over. There should be 6 of them, and it should be the consent of 4 of them. So it's the same from 5th Dan up to 7th Dan, okay? Concerning 4th Dan or higher examinations, the required number of qualified and suitable examiners, cannot be appointed by a method stipulated in Article 5. The number of examiners may be reduced to 5. In this case, with the consent of minimum 4 shall suffice for the decision of passion. So what that means is if they can't get 6 like 7th Dans together or 6th Dans together, they can get 5, but you still need 4 to pass you. All right, is what they're saying. Okay. And then the examination should be conducted by the organisation, and where the organisation lacks qualified examiners to meet the required number in Article 4, another organisation or other organisations may provide qualified examiners with the approval of the president of that organisation. So it means that if you don't have enough like 7th Dans in your country's organisation, you can get them from another organisation as long as your country president approves that and is happy with that. Okay. So for example, I sat on a grading panel quite recently in a different country, but that had to be approved by that country's federation president, who was also sat on the grading panel with me, so that was fine. The examinations for Q and for 8th Dan and over shall be determined by each organisation. Regarding 8th Dan and higher Dan examinations, each organisation shall determine a rigorous way of examination, including Jitsugi evaluation. So what they're saying is, look, for up to IQ, so over the Q, and anything over 8th Dan, like, we're not setting requirements for. You should decide that by yourselves, and it should be a rigorous way. All right. Now, I don't like. Nobody's looking at appointing people over 8th Dan, right? Examiners shall be appointed by the president of the organisation after the discussion with the officials and fully competent Dan holders. Fully competent Dan holders here means persons with equal or higher grades stipulated in Article 4 examiners qualifications. So what they're saying is, when you're deciding who should be on the grading panel, should be the head of the organisation, should discuss that with people who are in that organisation that have the same Dan grade that are required for the panelists. It doesn't mean that they could discuss with those panelists, obviously. I think that's pretty clear. The fees for the examination and registration are decided by the organisation. Return or deprivation of Q or Dan or Q. This is something that doesn't come up much, but the president of an organisation may, in consultation with the council or investigation committee of that organisation, order a Dan or Q grantee of the organisation to return his or her Dan Q or deprive him of the same in a case where the grantee disgraced the Dan or Q. So what they're saying is even if you pass the exam, if you do something really bad and that kind of disgraces the Dan grade that you're supposed to represent, then your organisation has the power to take it away from you. Okay. The organisation shall issue a certificate with the signature of the president of the organisation to each successful applicant. The organisation shall keep the Dan Q records properly. And then again, these are just guidelines, yeah. These are just guidelines. So don't be freaking out if in the UK, for example, right now in its current format, we don't technically have a president. We have a chairman, right? And then it's not quite the same it's a very different structure to how the Japanese Federation's structured, for example. And the chairman doesn't necessarily sign everybody's grading certificate. It's signed instead by our grading officer, who's the person who's in charge of doing that. All right. So that's you know, that it's the same thing in effect because they have the authority to do it. It's just a different system. So it's not, it's a guideline, all right? So don't be freaking out if it's a little bit different. In case of Dan Q examination held in a non-affiliated country, the memorandum of Dan Q examinations in an FIK non-affiliated country of May 23, 2005 shall apply. Okay, I don't know what that's about. I think that's about if you take a Dan grade, if they hold a Dan grade outside of a country, in a country that isn't part of the FIK, how that will be done. There must be some, like, rule about that, but whatever. Right, okay. Let's move on to the interesting stuff. So the Kendo examination, the examination subject. So here it sets out what you should do in the exam, all right? What you should be asked to do in the exam. So the examination subjects are as follows. For the grade first dan to fifth dan, the subject should be jitsugi. That's your, what we often call jigeiko. It's the tachiai with your partner. Nippon Kendo kata, so kata, and the written test. Okay, so written test. And then sixth dan and seventh dan, the jitsugi, and then Nippon Kendo kata. Okay, and then regarding the Nippon Kendo kata, they should be examined as follows. So first dan, it should be the tachi no kata 3 or more forms. For the second dan, it should be tachi no kata 5 or more forms. Third dan, it should be tachi no kata 7 forms, and then for fourth to seventh dan, it should be tachi no kata 7 forms and kodachi no kata 3 forms. If an applicant fails the Nippon Kendo kata or written test after the success in the jitsugi, she may be allowed to take that subject only again at an examination held afterwards. This special treatment shall apply only once for one occasion per applicant. So what it means is if you pass the jitsugi, but then you fail the kata or the written test, like if you do, like here, we don't do the written test on the day, but in Japan, for example, you have to do the written test on the day. So if you fail the written test or the kata, then instead of having to do the jitsugi again, you can come to the next grading and you can just do the part that you failed, but you're only allowed to do that once. And if you fail it again, you have to do the whole grade again next time, okay? Okay, so here's the big stuff, right? Here's the big stuff, and this is sort of, I think this brings us pretty much to the end of the document, because after this they start talking about Iaido and Jodo, right? But this is the real meat of the document right now, all right? And this is the stuff that I really want to talk about, okay? So I apologize it's taken us this long to get here, but I think the other stuff's important. But this stuff is really, really what I want to talk about today. So first is the criteria for awarding Dan grades, Fuyo Kijun. Okay, so this is what they're gonna look for. Okay, at a Dan examination, examiners evaluate. Now look, I'd also noticed, by the way, just sorry to that none of this is talking about IQ, all right? Because it said earlier that the Q, and it includes IQ, should be decided by the federation. Okay. At a Dan examination, examiners evaluate candidates for promotion. I keep getting thoughts whilst I'm mid-sentence. If you're going for IQ, if you're worried about what to do for IQ, take the Shodan as the baseline, all right, and you'll be fine, okay? Anyway, Dan examination. Examiners evaluate candidates for promotion for each Dan grade based on evidence of appropriate level of training and the degree of technical proficiency and stability acquired through the course of their study. The acceptability criterion of each Dan Fuyo Kijun is described as follows. Okay, so number one, okay, the central concern for Shodan, Nidan, and Sandan is the level of Kihon, basic techniques demonstrated by the examinee. The examiner assesses whether the candidate has learned and correctly acquired the basic skills, all right? So as I said already, all right, just before I delve into this, as I already said, this is talking about what the grading panel are looking to see in terms of what is the standard for awarding you that grade. All right, that's literally what Fuyo Kijun means. All right, so for Shodan, Nidan, and Sandan, the grading panel is making sure, and you'll notice they're all the same. Shodan, Nidan, Sandan, it's all the same for all three, right? The level of Kihon is basically you've learned it and you've acquired the basic skills. All right. Now, essentially what that means is that it says later, it says, we'll talk about after the Chakuranten is below, which we'll talk about below that. And that talks about what the examiner is actually looking for and what they're basing the decision on. But first, essentially, at each point, Shodan, Nidan, Sandan, have you managed to understand and become able to perform Kendo to a acceptable level of Kihon, basic ability? All right. So I guess, in my opinion, it's making the proper strikes correctly. All right. But we'll talk about that below. That's part of the Chakuganten. So we'll talk about that ways. Basically, the thing you need to know is first dan and Ikkyu, Nidan, Sandan, they're looking at your Kendo ability, okay? That's essentially what it says, right? Your ability to understand the basics of Kendo. 2, the central concern for 4th Dan and 5th Dan is the level of basic Kendo techniques and advanced techniques, okay? So Kihon and Oyo, okay? So number 2 is for 4th Dan and 5th Dan, right? Okay? And this says the central concern for 4th Dan and 5th Dan is the level of basic Kendo techniques and advanced techniques, Kihon and Oyo, okay? The examiner assesses whether the candidate has fully acquired and able to utilize basic and advanced skills, okay? And advanced skills. Now that's where it's starting to become difficult, because what it means by advanced skills is, and advanced techniques, is this word Oyo, okay? Oyo means application, put into practical use, all right? Actually applying, all right? So not just able to do the Kihon, but able to do the Kihon in terms of the techniques, all right? Can you do men? Can you do kote? Can you do do? Sure. Can you do ojiwaza? Can you do hikiwaza? Whatever. Now, when you should have 4th dan, 5th dan, can you do them and apply them appropriately, okay? What that means is, can you properly interact with your opponent in order to use these strikes? All right, now we'll delve into that a little bit more in a minute. But number 3, the central concern for 6th Dan and 7th Dan is the ability to demonstrate jiri. Okay, jiri. Okay, jiri is I'm looking on the dictionary right now. It's like sense, reason, all right? Technique and theory. Besides the basic and advanced Kendo techniques, the examiner assesses whether a candidate has acquired sufficient knowledge and understanding of jiri, okay? The reasoning. Techniques of Kendo accompanied with the theory or principles, okay? So now it's not just the techniques and can you apply them, but is there like a clear reasoning behind what you're doing? And then the last one, the central concern for 8th Dan and above is whether or not the candidate has reached the highest stage of jiri, referred to as jiri ichi, okay? The total integration of ji and di, okay? So essentially, the term jiri is made up of 2 kanji. One means like thing or stuff, and then one means like logic or reason. What it's saying to be Hachidan is you have to like totally be able to show that the stuff you do has complete reason or logic, okay? The candidate will be assessed on their ability to demonstrate a profound understanding of jiri ichi in addition to the aforementioned points for 7th Dan and below. All right? It's quite complex stuff. Now, the thing is what I find really interesting is that these are grouped together. Now, we're still just looking at the criteria. We're not looking about how those criteria are assessed just yet. We're going to look at that in a minute. And I'm gonna kind of break it down into a slightly simpler to understand explanation if I can as well after. But Shodan, Nidan, and Sandan are grouped together. It's the same thing. The criteria are the same. All right. It's just assessed at a higher level, and of course, each time you're paired with a partner of more experience, so there's a higher expectation. Similarly, with fourth dan and fifth dan, the criteria are the same, all right? It's demonstrating Kihon and Oyo, all right, together, right? Both fourth dan and fifth dan is that. But again, the difference between the fourth dan and fifth dan is going to be the quality, and obviously, you know, your partners are going to be more experienced as well. So it should overall, the difference between fourth dan and fifth dan should become somewhat clear. Similarly with sixth dan and seventh dan, the criteria itself are the same. It's demonstrating jiri, okay, the technique and theory, all right? And then it's only when it gets to eighth dan that it's like, right, now you have to really show that you understand the concept of jiri ichi. Okay, so it's quite deep stuff. Now let's move on to this, because I think this is a little bit more easier to kind of comprehend. This is the points for observation, the Chakugan 10. Okay, so this is what the Dan examiner is required to make a decision after paying careful attention to the following points in accordance with the above criteria. So, put simply, this is the stuff, okay, the candidates have to have this criteria to pass, all right? They have to show this criteria to pass, and then this Chakugan then is what the examiners are looking for to check that you meet these criteria, okay, if that makes sense. So, again, Shodan, Nidan, Sandan are together, all right? So 1, Chakuso and Deiho, the candidate's appearance and whether they are correctly wearing the Kendogi Hakama and holding the Shinai correctly, Chakuso, and appropriate manners and deportment, all right? So simple stuff, but it matters, and it matters all the way through, yeah? Are you wearing everything properly? Are your himo the right length? Is your boga tied correctly? Is your Hakama tied correctly? Your Kendogi tied correctly? Is it nice and neat? Are you holding the Shinai correctly? Are you doing the Dei correctly, Taito correctly, Sonkyo correctly? All this stuff, all right? I know it sounds basic, but it is what they're examining. This is the first stage of Kihon, right? 2, correct posture, okay? So the correct kamae, all right? So you're not trying to do this sort of thing, all right? Which sometimes you see, all right? 3, datotsu, strikes and thrusts in accordance with the correct basic techniques. So this is an important one. This is an important one because what it means is, in accordance with correct basic kendo techniques, that means you're able to hit men, kote, do, okay? You're able, as it gets higher up, I think, sort of Nidan, Sandan, able to show a more variety of waza. Maybe Shodan, you don't necessarily have to show lots of different techniques, but I definitely think by getting to Nidan, definitely Sandan, they're going to want to start seeing that you're able to do more than just men strikes, for example. Maybe Oju waza, maybe Hiki waza, maybe different types of waza, okay? And they have to be in accordance with correct basic kendo techniques. That means they have to be performed with kikentai no ichi, okay? So there has to be some kind of unification between your sword, body, and spirit. Means you have to be able to do your fumikomi, or trying to do the fumikomi, or fumikiri, launching yourself, trying to hit properly, okay? For the most part, all right? And then number 4, strong spirit, kise, okay? So you have to have the good spirit. Yeah, nice big voice, man, okay? Is one obvious aspect. Zanshin is also part of the strong spirit, okay? So these are all really important points. It's all basic, but it's all what they're looking for, all the way from Shodan to Sandan, all right? So up to Sandan, this is the stuff that you've got to get nailed down, all right? Nailed down. Now, 2, 4th dan, 5th dan. And here's what's really important. Same criteria as Shodan to Sandan with the addition of the following. So it means all of this stuff as well. All right? Doesn't mean, okay, now you're going for Yondan, you can let some of this stuff go. Yeah? 1, level of proficiency acquired in advanced kendo techniques. All right? So this means, I believe, when it says advanced kendo techniques, let me check the Japanese one. Where are we? Article 17. Article 17. Is it even the same? It is the same, yeah, okay. So, yeah, so, Oyo waza, okay? Oyo waza. So, we talked about this term oyo, yeah? So when they say advanced techniques, they mean oyo. So it means they have to be applied, the application of the techniques, all right? So it doesn't mean you're just doing, it means you're applying them appropriately, okay? Applying them appropriately, all right? That means there has to be some level now of reasoning, some kind of rationale, some kind of, later it's called DI, okay, which you can see is written a bit further down here, but it's a bit, you know, it doesn't, you know, DI is quite tough, but it has to have some kind of semblance of that, even if it's not necessarily really totally conscious. Yeah, you have to at least understand how you're applying the techniques to your match. Okay, level of mental and physical discipline demonstrated. Now, this is really important, and this is one I think is often sort of misunderstood or overlooked is probably a better word. And essentially, right? Okay, do you crumble when it doesn't go to plan? Yeah, do you know, panic, or if they attack when sort of, you know, often, I said this in a feedback video yesterday, lots of people ask me around 4th dan, 5th dan, what do I do if my opponent just keeps randomly attacking? And this is it. You demonstrate you have mental and physical discipline. And you don't panic and you don't match them, okay? You have to demonstrate you have mental and physical discipline, and you don't get carried away and you don't panic, okay? And then strategic skills to control and win a match, all right? So with these two, the third should follow, really, all right? So you should be able to, you know, control's a difficult word, but it means that you should have, essentially, you should be able to engage in shoba and win. All right. Now, it doesn't mean every single encounter throughout the tachiai, but it should show, you should be able, in other words, you need to make a good yuko datotsu, I think, is an easy way to think about that, and show that you're able to win shoba. Okay. And then as we move on, 6th and 7th dan, 8th dan and higher dan, the Jitsugi examination for 6th to 8th dan will consider the assessment points relevant to Shodan through to 5th dan with the addition of the following two elements and an expected higher overall level of technical proficiency. So it's all this stuff, but with an overall higher level of technical proficiency. So everything has to be even better, all right? Then you have to have an understanding of DI, okay, DI. The candidate must be able to execute waza and move in a way that is rational and purposeful, all right? So it means that there is a rationale behind the movements and techniques that you're executing, all right? So why are you doing the oji waza? Why are you doing the debana? Why are you doing the shikake, all right? It means, are you really engaging with the other side? Is there a conversation happening here between the two of you, and you are sort of using this to create beautiful waza, all right? That's what you need to start to be able to do for these level of gradings, all right? And then fukaku and hinkaku, okay? Fukaku is, put that in the dictionary there, like has to have style, and hinkaku is dignity and grace, okay? So demonstrating one's own style, which is dignified and elegant, is what they've written, okay? So it means that now your kendo has to be your kendo, all right? Up to 5th dan, they're expecting the textbook stuff, all right? Now, it's still textbook stuff, and they're not looking for weird stuff, all right? But now, because you've absorbed all of this kihon, and you've had years and years of practice, you started to develop your own understanding of the direction of your own Kendo, okay? And what you're doing is still clearly Kendo, and most importantly, it's dignified and it's elegant, all right? Now, these are difficult things to like put into criteria, right? You can't say, well, it has to have a nice posture or nice whatever. Of course, those things are there. They're already written there, all right? So what in addition brings that, all right? And it's having that ability to interact, I think, with your partner and create beautiful waza together, all right? And then the examiners are expected to make their evaluations and final decisions based on the above mentioned criteria within the prescribed examination time, all right? So your examiners, they're looking for this stuff here, and they're using this metric to judge it, all right? Now, it's simple, but it's not easy, all right? It's simple, but it's not easy, all right? If you're going for Shodan to Sandan, you need to master your Kihon, all right? Make sure that you're doing your Fumikomi. Make sure that your strikes have good tenouchi, that they're accurate, and then they're meeting the criteria of Kikentai no Ichi and have Zanshin. All right, as you start to get up towards third dan, you need to show that you're not just going man, but you're doing different techniques. When you start doing fourth dan and fifth dan, you need to start applying all your waza, okay? So applied, the application, how are you applying this to the other side, all right? It means that there has to now be a conversation with you and your partner happening for these waza to come about, all right? You need to make sure that you can show that you're not going to panic or crumble or get excited in the moment, but you're disciplined. And for 6th dan and 7th dan, 8th dan, you have to show that you understand the true relationship between you and your partner as you create waza together, all right? And through doing that, show that you have polished your kendo over the decades to get to this point, and show that you've developed your own understanding. You no longer necessarily need your hand holding to take your kendo in the correct direction, all right? And you're doing so with your kendo is dignified and elegant. It's graceful, okay? It's difficult stuff. It's difficult stuff, okay? And that is how to pass any downgrade, okay? In theory, all right? I think it's a great document. I'll link to it in the comments, or in the description, sorry. It's only, four pages there. And if you do EI or Jodo, there's stuff in there about that as well, but I don't know anything about it, so I've not looked at it. But I just think it's super important. I think it's definitely worth reading over when if you've got a grading coming up, doesn't matter what dan you're doing, read over it, think about it. Think about whether you're applying this to your practice. Because don't forget, if you're not doing this or thinking about this stuff in your practice, it's not going to suddenly come to you on the day, all right? So that's really important too. And there we go. That brings us to the end. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. I've really enjoyed looking over it and talking about it with you. I think it's a super important aspect of our kendo. It's really important that you do your gradings. I hope it's useful. Shop at KendoStar, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.